Morning, everyone. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has arrived in Egypt for the climate summit with a pledge to invest millions more in clean energy. But back home, there's a backdrop of criticism over the government's reticence over onshore wind and proposals over drilling licences for oil and gas in the North Sea. At least 190 countries will be represented, most of them by their leaders. Among them is Rishi Sunak's, and his headline announcement is more than £65 million for green technology innovation. After leaders arrive and gather for the so-called family photo together, the real work begins on areas like mitigation, reducing carbon emissions to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Adaptation, investment in, for example, crops that are more resilient to heat and also to drought, and loss and damage, which is wealthy nations paying reparation for their climate impact. Well, as you saw, Hannah Thomas-Peter is in Sharm el-Sheikh for us and joins us now. Hi, Hannah, a very good morning to you. Quite a lot for them to get through.
Yes, morning, Kay. I mean, the backdrop to all of this couldn't be more urgent. Scientists from the World Meteorological Organization warning that the last 8 years are on course to have been the warmest on record. We've seen floods ravage Pakistan, fires and heat waves across Europe and beyond, really adding urgency to the meeting here for the COP27 climate summit. And Rishi Sunak arriving, having performed that U-turn, saying he wasn't going to come, changing his mind, arriving here today, going to make some big announcements, we are told, trying to salvage some climate credentials, because there was real dismay and anger that the UK even considered not turning up here, having been the host of Glasgow COP26 last year. And what about Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, also here in Egypt? The wild card in all of this, is he going to undermine Rishi Sunak's position? This is his first trip abroad as Prime Minister, and there's a lot to keep an eye on today.
OK, lovely. Hannah, for now, thanks so much indeed. Let's talk about it, should we, with the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. That's Grant Shapps. Of course, he's joining us from Teesside this morning. Hello to you, Mr Shapps. Always a pleasure. Why did Rishi Sunak change his mind about heading to COP27?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak's always been very keen and has actually financed a lot of funding in the past on climate change, but actually just come in as Prime Minister. Obviously, we've got this hugely important task of settling the economy, the autumn statement coming up. I think he just wanted to make sure he had that in hand before jetting off. With that, I think, having worked on very intensively, he's now gone there. And as you say, he'll be making further announcements on climate later today.
So there's no more work to be done now ahead of the 17th of November on the economy?
I think the Chancellor is still working very hard on it, and I know that I've been working with the PM, the Chancellor, and myself on the business, the climate, the energy aspects of that. But I think the vast amount of work's been done, and so he felt it was appropriate to leave the country. But as ever, and I think it's a good thing in a Prime Minister, his first priority is to make sure that, particularly with that rather choppy period that we've been through, that things are stabilised here.
Oh, you've been working on it as well, the autumn statement. What's in it?
Well, of course, you'll have to wait until the 17th, so not too long now.
I thought I'd try.
But I mean, I think it's worth a try.
OK. He's gone, hasn't he, because Boris Johnson's there. That's why the Prime Minister's decided to go.
Well, no, I don't agree. Look, as I said, Rishi's actually put a lot of funding into climate throughout his time as Chancellor. Before he became Prime Minister, he's out there today announcing £65 million for green energy projects in developing countries. And actually, I'm here in Teesside today announcing a very important lithium refinery, green lithium refinery, the first in not just this country, but the first in Europe. This is all about being much more energy independent, energy sovereignty for the UK. This would reduce about 7% of Europe's entire refined lithium needs in years to come.
Don't we need to worry about lithium batteries? I mean, they're not particularly stable batteries, are they?
Well, I mean, lithium's involved in all sorts of batteries, from products we use in homes, on mobile phones, to motor cars we drive. I've driven an electric car for the last 3 or 4 years. Seems perfectly stable to me. And actually, I've always thought with things like electric cars, people think nothing of driving around with petrol cars with essentially explosions going on in the engine, in order to create the momentum for the car, for the motor, for the engine. But that's that with electric vehicles, you certainly have a lot less of that going on. So no, I think the safety record's pretty good.
Yeah, well, I think airlines might disagree with you. Many of them don't want to carry them. That's your physics lesson this morning, kids. You can head off to school now. Talk to me about fossil fuels, though. Profits on fossil fuels, should those be subject to a windfall tax? Is that something that perhaps the Prime Minister should be talking about while he's over at COP27?
Well, I think that might be a clever way of asking me what's in the autumn statement again. But, we will be setting that out. The Chancellor will be setting that out very shortly. I mean, it is the case that because fuel prices have been so high, there have been unexpected profits, of course. But I think it's important that we do carry on investing in making sure, not on fossil fuels, but on the renewable energy as well, that we've got the capacity, we've got the ability to get that market moving, which is why the lithium refinery that I'm talking about here in the northeast today is so important. But you will need to wait, as I say, till the 17th, till the autumn statement
I think
exactly
you gave us,
which measures are in there.
Sure, I think you gave us a massive hint there, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But what I do want to ask you about is international trade. I'm looking at the front page of the Times this morning, and basically half of not international trade, the international development, supporting those that can't support themselves, was 0.7% of GDP, down to 0.5%, we're told, because we can't afford 0.7 at the moment. And according to the front page of the Times this morning, half of that, almost half of that, is being spent here in the UK. So that's just clever accounting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, there are very strict rules actually for what can qualify as aid, and those are set down in a way that ministers can't just change. It's always been the case that people who come to the UK under certain circumstances, asylum seekers, for example, are part of that expenditure. Of course, what we've seen is that large number of people travelling across the English Channel with people traffickers, and those numbers have been high, and so some of that money is used in that way. But that's nothing new. That's always been the case.
You were Home Secretary, I think, for 5 days in total. But while you were there, you had a look at the paperwork and you said, got to get some of these asylum seekers out of these units. We've seen what's happened while I've been away and the problems that were caused there. Why were you so desperate to get them into hotels?
Well, simply that we've got to be careful not to break the law ourselves by detaining people who are able to be outside of that, what is not a detention centre, but a processing centre at Manston. So really just a question of making sure that we were acting within the law, and that's something that the Home Secretary is continuing to do now. So, really just a question of making sure that we're first of all trying to do all we can to prevent people from making that perilous, dangerous journey, being people trafficked, and then secondly making sure that we keep ourselves within the law, not detaining people when in fact they are able to be moved on rather than kept in what's just a processing centre.
So we were breaking the law?
Well, the advice I had was very clear that we were in danger of doing that if we weren't acting. And I did act during 6 days in the job, and I noticed that the Home Secretary has continued to act now as well.
Yeah, but the previous Home Secretary that is now the present Home Secretary, I'm sure we can keep up on that one. She was breaking the law, was she?
Well, I didn't see the advice that she was getting. What I saw was that the numbers had increased when I got there. The advice was very clear. It was that we needed to do a number of different things, not just actually moving people out. There's a way of reconfiguring the processing centre in order to make sure that we were maintaining the kind of correct legal structure for what is, as I say, a processing centre, not a detention centre, and I took that decision as well. And the Home Secretary's continued on the same path. So I think we're at one about what needed to be done.
Yeah.
I didn't see the advice beforehand, but I saw what I was.
Did you ask for it? Did you ask to see the previous advice?
No, so I mean, normally what happens is you, as a Secretary of State, you're provided with advice and you're invited to take it into account and make the judgment based of it. The advice was very clear to me. I didn't see the advice from prior to me. That would be unusual. It's not information that came to me. But I do know that the Home Secretary has continued along the same path that I set during that week that I was in the office, which was, of course, before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister.
OK, because as you know, the suggestion is that Suella Braverman, the previous Home Secretary, the present Home Secretary, ignored legal advice. I mean, that would have been wholly inappropriate, wouldn't it, if that was the case?
Well, it's hard for me. I didn't see that advice. It's hard for me to comment on. What I do know is the advice was very clear to me. I acted immediately on that advice. It may well be that the numbers have been changing very quickly during that period with new arrivals. And I note that she has continued along the same path. So, as I say, I think we're all moving in the same direction there.
OK. Do you support nurses going on strike for better pay?
Well, look, I think the first thing to say is we all remember what an extraordinary job they were doing. My own dad, as I'm sure you will recall, because we spoke at the time, was in hospital through COVID. They were doing a great job. I know that 1 million NHS workers got £1,400 rise last year, on top of, I think, a 3% rise. I very much hope that the NHS, nurses and others can get this resolved, because clearly it'd be damaging to everybody if nurses went on strike. We all care about our NHS, we all care about our health service, so no one would want to see that happen, I think, probably including the nurses.
Do we care about them enough to give them more money?
Well, there's an independent pay body that makes the recommendations. I believe we accepted it last year. So I'm not in a position to sort of preempt either what they decide or what the pay body does. But as I say, I know 1 million workers got £1,400 extra last year, and everyone. It's in all our interests to see the NHS working. We all care passionately about it. We rely on it, and strikes won't help anyone. I hope that is resolved.
How do you feel about Gavin Williamson's messages to the then Chief Whip?
Well, I don't think it was the right thing to do to send messages like that. I see they must have been sent in a moment of frustration. But, I think generally it is the case that it's much better to, write things which you would not live to regret later. And especially with colleagues, writing things which are polite, even if you have a point of view to express, I think is not unreasonable. So I don't think he was right to send them. The Prime Minister said the same, and I know that the party is going through a process looking at them at the moment.
How do you feel about working with somebody who feels it's appropriate to talk to women like that?
Well, look, as I say, it's not messages that I would want to see sent, and I would not send them. They were sent, presumably in a moment of frustration, and under a very different period or atmosphere in Parliament. It's. I always think never sort of send messages that you're going to regret in the cold light of day, as it were. And it was wrong that he sent them. There is a process now looking at that.
Are you going to vote for Matt Hancock and I'm a Celebrity?
I'm not, no.
Why not?
Well, look, I just think he should be here looking after his constituents, rather than in the jungle somewhere. No, I won't be voting for him. Although I can't promise I'll be voting for anyone at all. So that might just be a mission rather than anything else.
Will you be watching, though? I mean, are you looking forward to seeing him having to eat crocodile anus?
Tempting as that is, I think I'll probably be focusing on my job as business secretary, and I'll be off at COP27 later this week as well. So I fear I might miss him, depending on how long he survives once he goes in.
I see what you did there. Just a quick thought before I let you go. £60 billion in cuts and tax rises. Most of it cuts?
Well, let's wait and see. I know you've definitely used your third attempt to tempt me into commenting on what will be in the autumn statement. Everyone knows it's really important that we do get these books to balance. We can't leave this debt to future generations. Apart from anything else, it worries the financial markets, and that has the tendency to push up rates if we're not careful. Now, what Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt have done is make sure that the concerns of the markets have been stabilised. But what we're working on with this autumn statement is a package which puts us on a really good path to reduce that debt in the medium term, but also support the most vulnerable people in society. So that's what we've been working on, and so you won't have to wait long to answers to all those questions on the 17th of November.
OK, and it's definitely not worth £1 to see Matt Hancock eat witchetty grubs.
Well, maybe we'll do that on replay or something, I think.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us from Teesside this morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, several papers are leading with the climate summit this morning. The Telegraph reports that Britain has opened the door to paying climate change reparations to developing nations as it supports talks on the issue at COP27. The Mail leads with Ed Miliband's call for the UK to acknowledge its historical responsibility and support countries hit by climate change. And the US, UK, Canada and Australia have fallen billions of dollars short on their fair share of climate funding for developing countries. That's according to the Guardian newspaper this morning. Still to come on the programme, a year on from Glasgow, can COP27 deliver? Speaking to Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who's among leaders in Sharm el-Sheikh. We'll also hear from a nurse who's worked on the wards for 40 years as the NHS faces unprecedented strike action. And not long after 8 o'clock, we'll be joined by the Shadow International Trade Secretary. That's Labour's Nick Thomas-Symonds. Physiotherapists are the latest health workers planning to vote on whether to strike over pay. It's the first time in more than 100 years that the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy has balloted its members. They join nurses, junior doctors, midwives and emergency call workers. All of them could walk out this winter in what would be the biggest strike in the history of the NHS. Sharman is standing by for us at the Department of Health in central London this morning. Hi, Sharman, good morning to you. Just hearing there from the Minister on duty this morning, basically saying the nurses are not getting any more. I'm guessing the same for the rest.
Yes, well, as you quite rightly point out, physiotherapists are among just the latest union members, a part of the NHS that are now balloting its members, asking them whether or not they want to vote in favour of strike action. And it is all over pay, and that's because the Chartered Society of Physiotherapists have said that they actually rejected, a pay award back in September. And that's because they said that the offer was half the rate of inflation, and they believe that the offer in itself was shocking and insulting, and point to the fact that the people that have remained in the NHS have faced backlogs, massive backlogs, mainly as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. But these backlogs had already existed before, and now they say that many of the staff in the NHS are leaving and will continue to do so unless they are paid what they believe they deserved. Now, physiotherapists will start voting from today, but other unions have already gone to the ballot boxes. For example, the Royal College of Nursing, they've balloted 300,000 of its members. The results are meant to be coming back this week, but union reps there are already pretty certain that its members will be voting in favour of strike action. They're also joined by Unison. They represent porters, nurses, security guards and so on, as well as the Royal College of Midwives and the British Medical Association as well. Now, the government have said that they want for the unions to carefully consider the impact on patients, but union reps will argue that that's exactly what they're doing.
OK, Shaman, thank you very much indeed. In other news, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said his country is bracing for more Russian attacks on its power stations. Over the last month, Russia has focused on striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, causing power cuts and rolling outages across the country. The Kiev mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, urged residents to be prepared to leave the city in a worst-case scenario where the capital loses power and water. President Zelensky says millions of people are without electricity.
As of this evening, stabilization power outages continue in Kyiv and 6 regions. More than 4.5 million consumers are without electricity. Most of them are now in Kyiv and the Kyiv region. It's really difficult.
And we'll be speaking to the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK a little bit later on in the programme. Meantime, some other headlines for you this hour. And England rugby players are asking for help to find former Bath player Levi Davis, who's been missing for more than a week in Spain. He was last seen at a pub in Barcelona. The 24-year-old winger is also known for appearances on shows including Celebrity X Factor. The sister of jailed British Egyptian activist Alaa Abdel Fattah says he was stopped drinking water in an escalating hunger strike coinciding with the start of the COP27 summit. Abdel Fattah is serving a 5-year sentence for spreading false news, allegedly. Many international observers regard the charges as politically motivated. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has promised to raise the case with Egypt's leaders. 19 people have died after a plane crashed into Lake Victoria while trying to land at a nearby airport in Tanzania. 26 survivors were rescued and taken to a hospital in the coastal city of Dar es Salaam. America will vote tomorrow in the midterm elections. Georgia is one of the key swing states. And with an endorsement from Donald Trump, former American footballer star Herschel Walker is hoping to win for the Republicans. But his political journey has been far less smooth than his career as an athlete. Martha Kellner reports now from Georgia.
Even in a sea of controversial candidates, Herschel Walker stands out. He's a celebrity, a former American football star, endorsed by Donald Trump. And if he wins the Senate race in Georgia, it could be decisive in flipping the balance of power in this country back towards the Republicans. But Walker is not the candidate they hoped for. He ran on a message of anti-abortion, but stories from his past have emerged and been seized upon by his opponent.
Herschel Walker paid for an abortion for his then-girlfriend. She supported her claims with a $575 receipt from the abortion clinic.
Even his own son is saying Walker is lying.
Mr. Walker, you're anti-abortion, but 2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? How can the voters of Georgia trust you? Walker denies paying or pressuring women to get an abortion. Not that it seems to be affecting him here.
That red and black men will win again.
In the shadows of the stadium where his old team play, his supporters are steadfast. Do you think that Herschel is an appropriate candidate for the Senate?
Absolutely.
What do you like about him?
He will not vote with Biden 1 ounce.
And is that what you're concerned about most of all?
Absolutely. He's ruined our country. Bye.
You'll vote for Herschel Walker for the Senate?
I vote for Herschel just because he gave us great football. I mean, yes, absolutely.
People here seem moved to vote by issues like crime, petrol prices and immigration. But Blue America is focusing on abortion rights to pull voters to the polls. I'm being driven by Nala, who's canvassing potential voters. As a younger woman, she had an abortion and wants others to have the same choice.
I was not mentally prepared for that. I didn't have the finances for that. I wanted to finish school. So, yes, I made the decision for myself that I didn't want to give birth. Looking for 19.
More than 2.5 million early votes have already been cast in Georgia. But with hours to go before the polls open, the door knocking continues.
The youth vote is really low, so we get her out, make a plan for Tuesday, okay?
Around this country, Democrats hope their strategy of focusing on abortion rights will pay off on election night. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Georgia.
Trade Minister Greg Hands travelling to Taiwan for what will be the first face-to-face talks since the pandemic. Our Asia correspondent Helen Ann Smith is in Zhuhai for us in China now. Good morning to you. It looks a bit soggy where you are this morning. Tell us more about what's going on.
Yeah, it is absolutely soggy here. I'm in Zhuhai in southern China at the Chinese annual air show. The timing is really interesting given the news this morning that Trade Minister Greg Hands is going to Taiwan. That is a very significant decision. He's the first UK minister to travel to Taiwan since the pandemic, and it won't have gone unnoticed by anyone, not least by China, that it comes at a time of real heightening tensions between China and Taiwan, a time where a number of Western governments have chosen to send representatives there. And while that may send its message, China is sending its own message today, a show of real military strength. I just want to show you around, Pit Kay. It is raining very, very heavily, but we're at the Chinese air show. It happens annually, and it is a celebration of all things aviation here in China. There's incredible varieties of things here. There's aerobatic demonstrations from the Chinese equivalent of the Red Arrows. There are helicopters here. There are drones. There are all sorts. But what it is also is a chance for China to show off the latest in its cutting-edge military technology, a chance for it to show just how strong, just how developed its military is. And I just want to point your attention to this lineup of jets here, because these are the very family of jets that on a daily basis now are being sent to fly in Taiwanese airspace. And there was a time where that would have been considered an unusual and provocative activity. Not now. And these days we're seeing multiple jets a day pass over what's called the median line, the sort of a de facto maritime border between Taiwan and China. Just yesterday, 21 such jets, just like these ones, made that journey. And it's just worth stressing just how unusual it is to be allowed so close up to Chinese military equipment, and that in itself is a real demonstration of strength. So China sending its own message today, a message that its military is developed, it is modernised, it is transformed from what it was 5 or so years ago, and it is a military, they say, that would be ready to fight an international war if it were to ever come to that. Of course, the world worries very much about China ever moving to invade Taiwan, but a real escalation of tensions on both sides.
OK, for now, Helen Ann, thank you. Well, if you scan the QR code, here we go, on your screen right now, you can listen to the latest edition of the Sky News Daily podcast. Today, Sally Lockwood is looking at why China is still chasing a strict zero-COVID policy with its people facing regular lockdowns and restrictions. You can subscribe to the Daily for free wherever you get your podcast. I love this story. The comedian Peter Kay has announced a return to stand-up with his first live tour in 12 years.
Hey, garlic bread.
Hey, it's the future, lads.
Hey, when you back on tour?
Next month.
It is the future. 49-year-old who's been largely absent from the public eye announced the new tour with a Twitter video. Peter Kay says tickets will start at £35, the same as his last tour in 2010, due to the cost of living crisis. A Shetland pony called Pummerkill is being entered into the Guinness Book of Records as the world's smallest ever horse. At 3 years old, he stands just 50 centimetres tall, perhaps the perfect size for his work as a therapy for children and also for the elderly. His instructor hopes the official world's smallest horse designation will be announced soon. He's even got a little ramp. Look at that. Still to come on the programme for you, Nicola Sturgeon. Where is she? Stay tuned, find out. Here on Sky News. Very welcome to join us this Monday morning. You've missed the Business Secretary if you've only just tuned in. He's been talking about his time as Home Secretary, what advice he was given so as not to break the law when it came to migrants and being kept in detention centres. And this is what he said about the former, now present Home Secretary.
The advice I had was very clear that we were in danger of doing that if we weren't acting. And I did act during 6 days in the job, and I noticed that the Home Secretary has continued to act now as well.
Yeah, but the previous Home Secretary that is now the present Home Secretary, I'm sure we can keep up on that one. She was breaking the law, was she?
Well, I didn't see the advice that she was getting. What I saw was that the numbers had increased. When I got there, the advice was very clear. It was that we needed to do a number of different things, not just actually moving people out. There's a way of reconfiguring the processing centre in order to make sure that we were maintaining the kind of correct legal structure for what is, as I say, a processing centre, not a detention centre.
Well, let's unpack that, should we? Tamara is standing by for us. I know that you were listening to that interview. Good morning, Tamara. What was he saying?
Well, this is very interesting as Manston and the whole issue of what the government does when migrants have been processed here continues to be in the news. Grant Shapps, remember, 3 weeks ago, Suella Braverman resigned as Home Secretary. He became Home Secretary and was there for just 6 days before the government collapsed. Rishi Sunak came in and moved him. Now, during that period, he says he came in, was given clear advice that the Home Office was in danger of breaking the law, which could invite some very expensive legal action against the government, because the conditions there were overcrowded. He says, I acted during those 6 days as Home Secretary, and I understand he immediately started commissioning hotels and trying to get accommodation ready through the agencies the government uses for that to get people out of there. The question is, of course, what was happening the previous day when Suella Braverman was there? Did she ignore officials' advice to move people out of there? He says he hasn't seen what she was shown, but can it have been that different from one day to the next? And also that the numbers were moving very, very quickly. But I think this will reignite questions about whether she was told to do that and didn't do so.
Also thought on Gavin Williamson and his petulant messages to the former Chief Whip.
Yes, Rishi Sunak came in promising professional government full of integrity and accountability. And, of course, second crisis to hit him after the Suella Braverman issue is why Gavin Williamson is now back in Cabinet, Minister without portfolio, and has been, we now know, sending these aggressive-looking messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. And his colleagues say it's unacceptable. Rishi Sunak, speaking to reporters overnight on his trip to COP27, says it's unacceptable. But why have there been no consequences, especially since it emerged that the Prime Minister was warned there was a complaint pending against Gavin Williamson, who, of course, has been sacked by two former Prime Ministers, by Theresa May and Boris Johnson, in the past. If that complaint was pending, why did he appoint him to the role? And I think there'll be more questions about Rishi Sunak's judgment, with yet more bad headlines involving Gavin Williamson.
I think you're absolutely right. And I also think that we've got tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock. Looking forward
more
to
about
it.
that
Thanks
then.
so much indeed. Thank you. Well, as the days get shorter, darker and colder, you might be dreaming of escaping overseas for a few days. We're going to be talking about that in just a moment or two. Before that, though, I also want to tell you about what's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we know that Rishi Sunak has arrived there overnight. We've got some pictures of him there. I think he's going to be taking part in the family photo, as it's called, very shortly indeed. Also there, also taking part, I'm sure, will be Nicola Sturgeon. She is the SNP leader and the First Minister of Scotland, and she is joining us now. Hello, Ms Sturgeon. It's good to see you, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Tell us why you've decided to go.
Hi. I think it's really important that governments at all levels contribute to these discussions and play our part in meeting our own obligations domestically, but encouraging greater progress globally. Scotland is the European co-chair of an organisation called the Under 2 Coalition, which brings together devolved governments like mine with states, regions across the world. Together, we represent something like 50% of the global GDP, and many of the levers for tackling climate change lie in our hands. So it's really important that everybody with a part to play does that to the full. Scotland was also the host of COP26 last year in Glasgow, and the Scottish Government played a part in putting some key issues at this COP on the agenda, loss and damage, for example. So again, important to be here, to be encouraging collaboration and playing our part in hopefully a good outcome from this COP as we continue to address the accelerating emergency of climate change.
But isn't that what Rishi Sunak is doing already? I mean, could you not have done what you needed to do remotely?
No, I think this is the fifth COP that I have participated in, and it's really important to be here, to be having the discussions, to be playing our part in finding the solutions. Now, Rishi Sunak is here. I welcome that. I think it is right that he is here. But if we look in a UK context at many of the the decisions that will determine whether or not the UK as a whole meets its own climate obligations. Many of them, for Scotland, are responsibilities of the Scottish Government. Renewable energy, for example, energy efficiency, changing how we travel. So it's really important that everybody with a part to play does that to the full. And I think it is vital that the connections that are made here are made, and that we all do that work. And if you speak to many campaigners, many governments, particularly from the global south, they warmly welcome Scotland's contribution here, generally on this issue, but particularly on the issue of loss and damage. Without the intervention last year of the Scottish Government, and this is not just my view, you'll hear this from campaigners here, it is unlikely that we would be now seeing that issue with the prominence it has in Egypt. So I think we've all got a part to play here. Climate change affects all of us. It affects some more than others, but every single one of us has an obligation to play our part in tackling it.
Including the leader of Glasgow City Council, Susan Aitken, who's also gone, even though she's just announced a £120 million black hole in the city's budget.
Yes, Glasgow was the host of COP last year. Susan is here to hand on the COP responsibility to Egypt, to Sharm el-Sheikh this year. Glasgow is Scotland's biggest city. Scotland won't meet its climate change targets if the city of Glasgow doesn't do that. You know, I'm not arguing with your line of questioning, Kay, about why we're here, but actually what matters is what's being discussed here, what the focus is on implementing the progress made at Glasgow, what the commitments will be coming out of this COP. Climate change, you know, even given the turbulence of the year we've just lived through, climate change is the biggest obligation, the biggest challenge the world faces right now. If we don't, all of us, leaders at all levels of government, if we don't take this seriously, increasingly seriously, if we don't make the right commitments, implement those commitments, then we're not going to have a planet worth handing on to generations to come. There are fewer, more important things than climate change. But in the here and now, it's also important to improving the security of energy supply, of making energy more affordable. That is actually how we save the planet as well. So I think there would be more pertinent questions, I think, to ask of people like me and Susan Aitken if we weren't playing our full part in discussions like this, and not just playing our part in discussions, but actually showing the leadership that we need to see if the world is going to properly address this challenge.
I suppose my viewers and your constituents might say what is important is the cost of living crisis, and it's costing money to send you and others, the Glasgow City Council, etc., and also the carbon footprint.
Look, you will find here, I'm here in the main pavilion of COP27, and there are representatives around me of devolved governments, of states in other countries, of German Länder. There will be governments at all levels represented here. We would be abdicating our responsibility if we weren't here playing our part in meeting these challenges. There is, of course, a cost in all sorts of ways to tackling climate change, but there is a much, much bigger cost associated with not tackling climate change. And that's how we've got to see that. The cost of living certainly occupies my government day in and day out right now, but dealing with the cost of living also necessitates dealing with the issues around climate change. The route to more secure energy, to cheaper energy, is a transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And that is central to the whole climate change agenda. Again, you know, why is a country like Scotland here? Scotland is an oil and gas producing country. We've got an obligation to show leadership in that transition away from fossil fuels, notwithstanding the challenges and the difficulties that presents to us. So I think if you went and did a straw poll, I remember speaking to you on the ground in Glasgow last year, if you did a straw poll around people represented here and asked them whether they thought it was important for Scotland to be represented, you'd get an overwhelming vote in favour of that, because there's a recognition of the role we've got to play, but also the leadership that Scotland has shown.
OK. A thought while I've got you on Matt Hancock going into the jungle?
Well, I think it's disgraceful, actually. I'm not particularly interested in how he gets on in the jungle, but, you know, most of my interactions with Matt Hancock over the past few years, when he was still UK Health Secretary, were over COVID. And, you know, we're not yet properly out of COVID. We certainly haven't had the full public inquiries that we need to have. And to see him, I think, demeaning the office that he used to hold, and also, I think, doing a real disservice to those whose lives have been impacted by COVID. I think it's the wrong decision. But there are many, many more important things for all of us to be focusing on right now than whatever Matt Hancock chooses to get up to.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much for taking the time. Always appreciated.
And to you.
Thank you. Let's bring in the Greek Minister of Tourism, should we, Vasileios Kikilas. Hello to you. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. I wonder if we could just start with COP27 there and widen the debate after that. How worried are you about climate change, global warming and its impact on tourism in Greece?
Well, first of all, it's an honour to be in Sky News. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Secondly, yes, of course, we're worried. And of course, we're campaigning on that 2023 sustainable touristic model, low carbon emission, friendly to the environment, eco-friendly, eco-islands in Greece, which means islands with renewable energy. We started last year with Simi and Halki and Astipala, and we're looking into bringing that into hotels, resorts, clean beaches, clean cities. It's not going to be easy, of course. It costs in the middle of a war, in the heart of Europe after 80 years, incredible. Inflation, energy crisis, the prices are going up, but we've got to keep on pushing forward because we owe to the next generations.
What can British tourists do to try to help you in this?
Well, first of all, 3 million Brits this year in Greece. Amazing story.
I was one of them.
Thank you very, very much for that. In branded destinations and alternative destinations, we love the Brits for that. I think it was #1 destination for Great Britain this year. And
why do you think
they
that
have
is?
a culture.
What is it? What is it that appeals to the Brits so much about Greece, do you think?
Well, you see them out in the parks when there's 13 or 14 or 15 degrees here during the summer. So you can imagine with the weather in Greece how nice it is and cozy it is. I think they blend in. The Greeks love them. They enjoy themselves in the islands, in the mainland. They have the exquisite Greek food. They dance with the music. They eat the sweets. They by the beach, up on the mountains, during the summertime, but off-season also. They started coming earlier now, Jet 2, EasyJet. We're going to keep on flying for November, then March and April. So a Greek weekend.
Oh, I like that.
Yes,
I see what you did there.
Yes, not just our students here and how we love Christmas in London and how we keep on coming back, but the Brits, I think, have decided that when they talk about vacations, they talk about Greece.
Yeah. Which is your particular favourite part of Greece?
Mine?
Yes.
I'm the Minister of Tourism. Imagine if I chose one instead of all the others. We've got 128 inhabited islands and the mainland also. I think that people, travelers, tourists, and of course, you keep on adventuring in Greece and keep on finding out new destinations. That's the magic of it. It doesn't stop. It's a unique experience. It's a state of mind. Because since the ancient days until today, we love to host people, strangers, foreigners, feed them, give them something to drink, give them a bed to sleep, and then off they go. It's a part of our culture and of our DNA.
But it is becoming more and more difficult to have sustainable tourism or not? How do you turn that corner? How do you make sustainable tourism the first thought when tourists get on a plane?
Well, first of all, I think 1 out of 2 travellers from now on will travel in accordance with that. Our airline companies and carriers thinking about low carbon emission, yes, we go on that plane. Do resorts and hotels take care of the environment and recycle the garbage, for example? Yes, we go to the resort. Are cities and beaches clean? Yes, we respect that country or city and we visit there. So our program is a program of infrastructures, public infrastructures, which we will spend money on to be able to upgrade them in that extent. So how we deal with our waste, how we deal with the water, how we deal with berth allocation for the cruising industry in our islands, how we deal with private investments, as I said, in order to be able to sustain. And it's not going to be easy. It's a transition that you need to push forward, and it's one step at a time. But that's our goal in terms of communication, but in terms of infrastructures also. And I think that we will be pioneers since we are one of the top touristic brands in the world. We're seeking to show the way to everybody else. It's not easy to transform an island into a sustainable destination, but we did it. Yes, Astipala is a small island, Halki is a small island, but it's already there. So we've proven to the world that it's doable. Of course, there are issues to be taken into account since the costs of energy are huge nowadays, but This is something that happens now. We've got to deal with it now, but also have our eye into the future.
OK. It's good to see you, Minister. Thank you for
very
taking
much.
the time
Thank
to
you.
come in this morning. We really do appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Waiting for you next year.
Ah, lovely. I can't decide where to go. You couldn't choose one for me. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Let's have a look at our climate change data, should we? The right of the screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced. On the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now than in 1880. That's when modern record-keeping began. And finally, the bottom left, the total amount of CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes in real time. If you were with us earlier, you'll know that we were chatting to the Business Secretary about what's happening with the NHS facing the biggest strike in its history, with physiotherapists joining doctors, nurses, paramedics and other healthcare workers voting on whether to strike over pay. With me now is Dave Carr, who was an NHS nurse for 40 years. Hi.
Hi there.
It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme
this
morning. Did you vote to strike?
I will be voting to strike, yeah.
Yeah, why?
I think that we have to see what's happening in the NHS at the roundabout, why nursing and other health workers are voting for strike action. And I think that the first thing that we need to get across is it's not just about money in our pockets, it's about the sustainability of the NHS. In nursing, we're currently working in England alone with 47,000 vacancies. There are critical incidents declared every day where operations are cancelled and therapies are delayed. We have situations where we cannot discharge patients back into the community because of the social care crisis, and we know that that's because of staff as well. We are constantly facing pressures of short staffing on our wards, in our critical areas, in our A&E departments, and it's compromising patient care. So for a lot of nursing staff, it isn't just about money, it is about being able to deliver safe patient care.
Yeah, you talk about operations having to be cancelled, but of course more will have to be cancelled if nurses go on strike.
Well, I think that there's the crux of the matter, really. We are unable to recover from the COVID pandemic without a workforce plan. We are losing more nurses just than we're recruiting at the moment, and we are never going to get on top of that. You're looking at a couple of years for non-urgent operations now, and even urgent operations, we haven't necessarily always got the staff to match those. And I think that what we're saying, what we're pleading with the government is, if you and the country, if you want an NHS that's fit for purpose and can care for your families and your loved ones safely, you have to pay staff to work in those environments. I could go to the United States and earn 3 times what I'm earning now. I could go to Canada and Australia and New Zealand and earn double what I'm doing. And a lot of our staff are doing that now. And our student nurses, when they qualify in the UK, are saddled with huge tuition fee debt as well. It's an unsustainable model at the moment. It's not working. It is broken. And we are seeking to take strike action to not just to deal with the massive loss of earnings. I've lost about 15% of my earnings over the last 10 years, but it is so that we can recruit and retain people inside the NHS.
And do you, from what you're saying, we need to change the way that the NHS operates? It's not just about paying medical professionals more, it's about changing the way the NHS operates in totality.
Well, I mean, I think we need a proper plan about where the NHS is. I mean, that's a big argument about how do we deliver public health. I mean, we've just gone through a massive pandemic crisis. I mean, I worked both waves in a critical care unit across the road at St Thomas's during that pandemic, and we've not recovered from that in terms of the damage it's done to the staff. But we need to look at what our population's health needs are and how we deliver that. But if you look at other areas in the health service, like GP services now, they're collapsing. Our health service is not about to be broken. It is broken. It is not working at all.
How do we fix it?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is recognise that if you want a health service that works and not a two-tier system where people have to go to the private sector to get their operations, you have to pay the staff and you have to attract staff and you have to keep staff inside those areas. We don't want to go on strike. No nursing staff wants to go on strike. I spent 2 years, along with my colleagues, risking our lives to keep people alive. This is not an option that's taken lightly. But we think that this is the only option we've got now because we've got a government that's not listening.
And if they don't pay you more?
If they don't pay more, then there will be strike action.
We were speaking to the business secretary earlier and he was saying they're not going to pay you any more money.
Well, that's interesting. We've seen the government make U-turns on lots of things. I mean, obviously, we watched Liz Truss crash the economy recently, and we did that with drop jaws, especially after the way the pandemic was handled and the late lockdowns that gave us a huge amount of extra work inside the NHS. I don't think the government's fit to look after the economy, let alone the NHS. I mean, maybe it's time for a general election and get leadership in that is prepared to recognise how important the NHS is to this country.
Sadly, we're out of time. It's great to talk to you. Do keep in touch. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Still to come in the next hour here on the programme. We're going to be hearing more about what the Business Secretary had to say to us today, not least about nurses, but also about one of his colleagues who sent very fruity and unnecessary, some might say, text messages to a colleague being very disparaging about her. What do you think about that? Stay tuned.